Hi, and welcome to our attendees joining. If you're here for Alta Live, a conversation with Mark Bittman and Alice Waters, you're in the right place. We're going to wait about a minute or so while our attendees fill into this Zoom webinar. While we do that, I will get some bookkeeping out of the way. Thank you all for joining us here at Alta Live. This is our digital event series of Alta Journal. I'm Beth Spotswood, Alta's digital editor. Today, I am very excited to welcome two of the leading voices in food in general. Author and food journalist Mark Bittman's new book, Animal, Vegetable Junk, digs into the history of what, why, and how we eat. And joining him is pioneering chef and author Alice Waters, whose forthcoming book, We Are What We Eat, will be published and available to you June 1st. Moderating today's discussion will be Alta's editor and publisher, Will Hearst. Will founded Alta in 2017. We're an award-winning quarterly that aims to celebrate the writers, poets, creators, innovators, conservationists, and artists of the West. If you enjoy today's conversation, I hope you'll check out more of our work at altaonline.com. Mark, Alice, and Will talk for about 30 minutes. Please use the Q&A button to ask questions of Mark or Alice, and I'll return in about a half an hour to get to as many of those questions as possible. All of this interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. We will also email you a link to watch this video later, as well as links to buy Mark's book, Alice's book, support the Edible Schoolyard, Alice's nonprofit that she's so passionate about. So we will keep you informed after the event as well. With that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Will Hearst.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. I feel like one of those people who was invited to a very important dinner party. And then when I looked at where I was seated, I was next to the two most interesting people at the dinner party. And I just have an opportunity to kind of overhear what's on their mind and what they're saying to each other. But both of our guests today are accomplished writers and thinkers and cooks and food pioneers, people that have really thought deeply about where our food comes from and how to prepare it. And they are preparers and they are writers and thinkers. So I think one of the things I've noticed, I've spent a lot of time reading these two books, and both of them sort of have a portion that's a critique and a portion that's about solutions. And there's an overlap of the way they both think, but we'll see if you agree. But let me start by asking Mark Bittman a question, because in my family, you know, in the kitchen, there's the How to Cook Everything book, there's Craig Claiborne, there's, you know, maybe one of Alice's cookbooks, and there's The Joy of Cooking. And these are kind of the Bible books. So I even gave my kids copies of the Yellow Book when they were starting to become cooks, because it is an encyclopedia. But I wanted to ask Mark, you know, you're identified, at least in our family, as a cook and a food writer, but this book that you've written is a really sort of analysis of the history of food. It's a critique of where food comes from. And I was kind of curious, has this always been an interest of yours, or, you know, how did you decide to sort of go in this direction?
Well, I think I would say that slightly tongue in cheek, but also half seriously, that saving the world has always been an interest of mine. When the opportunity came to speak a little more loudly about food and more broadly, I saw it and I took it. And I was lucky in a way that the early part of my career, which was recipe writing and cooking, was successful enough so that I could transition into writing about what I wanted to write about. So I'll always do recipes, and I love cooking, obviously, but food is much more than recipes, and food is much more than eating, and food is much more than just enjoyment. And it's important to talk about that. And I think, you know, Alice will speak for herself, of course, but we came at this in different ways, but our backgrounds, we are proudly 60s people, and our backgrounds are not dissimilar. And I think we both feel like to not use our platforms to talk about what's right and just and fair would be a huge mistake.
I do notice, Alice, in the beginning of your book, one of the first sentences, first paragraphs is about the counterculture and how you were part of that before even Chez Panisse opened, and that it was only later that you saw these two things as kind of one thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about, the evolution of your thinking, and Edible Schoolyard is now a big part of your life. It's more than just the restaurant.
I have to say, I was really politically educated at UC Berkeley in the 60s. I arrived there in 1964 when Mario Salvio was speaking at Sproul Hall. And the way that he spoke really got to me, because he was about how we can change the world, not just about free speech at UC Berkeley and stopping the war in Vietnam, and civil rights, but he just gave me that big hope that if we all got together, we could make something happen. And I felt so empowered by that of course he was Italian, Sicilian, and he drank a bottle of wine when he had dinner. But there was something that was so deeply humane about and about equality, about, I mean, didn't he teach a course at Cal? It was called poetry and mathematics, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But I have to say that I felt like I could open a restaurant when I never had hardly worked in one, because I thought that if I were doing something that I was passionate about, and if it were good, that people would come. And that's in fact what happened. And so it's like just knowing that if you do what you really feels, I mean, it's like what you said, Mark, about the need to say what you really think about, the big picture of food and how food is connected to farming and climate, and all of that. It's so important right now.
Well, I always admire anyone that starts a restaurant, because I think the first thing you hear is from all of your friends that it won't work. And so you have to have some sort of courage to take that leap. One of the things I learned from Mark's book was sort of the history of food. I mean, Mark's book sort of goes back to prehistoric agriculture and, progresses through the Green Revolution. And, part of what I learned from this book is that there's been a kind of tension in the food, in the way food is brought to the table, and how it affects the land. And I want to come back to this question of, farming and better practices that lead to what's on your table. But Mark, you must have done an incredible amount of research to pull together this kind of history of agriculture from prehistoric to yesterday.
I mean, I did, but I didn't do enough, which is kind of funny, because I found the book earlier this week that I thought, how did I miss this? But anyway, yes, I learned a lot. I studied a lot. I'm not a historian. I'm not an academic. I really am a journalist and obviously a cook. But I'm capable of learning. And I think I'm a decent enough writer so that I was able to put this all together. As with any book, there's more left on the cutting room floor than there actually is in the book by the time you're done. But hopefully I did a good job of choosing the right stuff. Look, the history of food and agriculture obviously are interrelated, but only in the last 100 years. I think we can say that the grandparents of our generation, yours and Alice's and mine, are probably we're probably the first generation of people where everybody didn't know a farmer. I mean, our our great grandparents and earlier than that, everybody either was a farmer or knew a farmer. And now,
Sure.
and now you have to make an effort to meet a farmer. And yet farmers basically determine what we eat, and what we eat determines so much else. So agriculture and eating are political acts. They're determined a lot by policy. They're determined a lot by land ownership, by profit. And in this country, sadly, they're only rarely determined by what's good for farmers and what's good for eaters. Eaters are sort of at the end of the list. Whatever happens, they'll take care of themselves. There are obviously exceptions, and California is home to more of them than most places, but the exceptions really prove the rule. 95% of the food that's grown in the United States, and probably 60% of the food that's fed to people in the United States, that's made available to people in the United States, is not good for us, and is not good for the land. So these are huge issues, and I'm almost daily disheartened that when people talk about big issues, they do talk about big issues, but they almost always leave out agriculture and food, because so many people just take it for granted that the food system works, that it serves us. But it only serves those of us with enough money to take advantage of the small amount of good food that's out there. It does not serve the majority of people in the United States, and it certainly doesn't serve the majority of people in the world. Alice,
When I was a youngster, I mean, one of the things that we were told was that there was a thing called the Green Revolution, that we were going to use technology to increase crop yields, and India was going to be able to feed itself, and China, and that sense of a starving world was going to be eliminated through technology, and that's partly true, but it's partly problematic.
I mean, I'm gonna answer that quickly because I'm aware that our time is limited, but there's nothing wrong per se with technology, but what kind of research have we been supporting, and what kind of technology have we been encouraging? We've been supporting, when I say we, I mean taxpayers' dollars, have been supporting the research of and use of technology for increasing yield at the expense of everything else. And as I said before, farmers come as an afterthought and eaters come last. If we did research into how to farm and how to feed ourselves in a sustainable way, in a healthy way, in a way that worked for everyone, we would have seen much different results. This is not a call to go back to some kind of reactionary notion of farming, 19th century farming. It's a call to do things in a way that makes more sense than the way we're doing them now. And that's a combination of old and new, and even things that haven't been developed yet.
Alice, you look like you were about to say something.
When you said not going back to the way that we thought about farming a century ago. And I really believe that the only way that we're going to address hunger and the environment and climate is by going back to small farms, decentralizing in that way. I always think about the way that we've operated almost 50 years at Shea, that we have one farmer that we get the majority of food from. And mind you, we're only serving around 500 people a day, but we buy from a whole group of people during the course of the year, and even the season, peaches from this and peaches from that. And everybody says it's so impractical. How can you afford to do that?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I just say I can't afford not to do it. It's not only for the deliciousness of what comes on the plate in terms of ripeness and nutritious food, but it is the way that we connect with the people who really care about our nourishment. We take all of the, scraps from the restaurant, and we take them an hour to our farm, and we pick up the vegetables when we come back. And we are able to pay the farmer the real cost of that food. So he or she can take care of the farm workers and do what they need to do. Right now, it's the middleman who gets the money, that delivery person. But just think of the power of procurement. And it's absolutely the question I wanted to ask you, Mark, and you, Will, that the idea that the public school system has this power of procurement, this huge amount of money that they reimburse schools for the purchase of food. That money is all going to fast food now.
Yeah.
But we could take that same amount and give it to slow food. And if we did that, it could be like, I call it school-supported agriculture.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, Alice, I'm reminded, it wasn't that long ago that people said that solar energy was too expensive and it's impossible. It'll never, but once you get the scale, I mean, if you could get colleges and institutions to procure from these sources, you might find that the supply actually increases and the price actually goes down. So sometimes now solar is considered about to overtake carbon as a source of energy in terms of lower price.
But can you imagine how the school system could support all of the people that are doing the right thing? It could really support a diverse group of people. Can you imagine how many tortillerias we need?
Could you scale it up to you're you're a Cal Berkeley person. If they've got 30,000 students, that's a lot bigger than the middle school.
Well,
can you get university to?
Yeah. Well, Will, you're getting to my big point. It's that we need love.
I'm trying to lead the witness.
I wonder why. Have you been connected to the University of California in some way? But
I think Mark says in his book, and I think he's right. The students want this food. It's not like you're trying to get them to take vitamins. They actually prefer to eat this way.
Exactly. And it's just a myth from fast food culture that schools are impossible, bureaucratic, they can't cook, they don't have any cafeterias anymore. It's impossible to not buy from a big vendor. And these are all myths. It is possible. It is desirable. Children do love food, do want to help in the preparation, the service of it. I mean, I just over and over, I have 25 years of seeing middle school children that speak 22 different languages at home. They fall in love with food and the land.
Do either of you know what they do in France or Japan or other countries where there's sort of respect for food and farmers? Is there something we could learn from those systems?
I want to say, of course, Mark, you should say your piece, but I think they have the issues that we have because we fed them fast food. And now they have taken over, the idea of fast, cheap, and easy. And you can read about that in Olivier Rollanger's memoir that just came out called A Delicious Revolution. But you hear how the same thing that happened here happened in France. But they still have ways of feeding students that are beautiful. And in Japan, they bring a little cart around to the classroom. And the classroom reassembles itself, puts tablecloths on the tables, the whole big long row. The kids bring their chopsticks The food is brought in to a table, and the kids help to pour the miso soup in the bowl and the rice. And so this is a way to do it without, to make that gathering place civilized. In the
Well,
classroom,
yeah,
you don't have a cafeteria.
you raised an interesting point. There's that old joke, and I heard it in the context of a food writer who said, in France, if the food is the highlight of your meal, you're eating with the wrong people, because a meal is meant to be a social experience and it's meant to be conversation. And yes, it's food, but it's also a moment in your day when you're interacting and sharing and
Yes.
conversing. Mark, you talk in your book a little bit about something I hadn't heard before called agroecology. Can you sort of say what that is a little bit? And that sounded like something that you thought was important.
Well, I will, but I want to say two things in response to some of the stuff Alice said.
Sure.
One is that of course she's right. I mean, I am one of Alice's biggest fans, so I always think she's right. We have minor disagreements from time to time, but she is right that this another world is possible. The pipe dream is not that we can do things better. The pipe dream is that the status quo can continue to exist, because we're destroying our health, we're destroying the land, we're destroying the climate, we're torturing animals, everything. Everybody knows all of this. That situation can't endure. And so another situation has to take its place. It might as well be a better one. Food is expensive. It's not easy to grow, and it's especially not easy to grow it well. But we are subsidizing, right now, we subsidize bad food. We subsidize the growth of bad food for the most part, which makes it difficult for people who want to concentrate on growing or buying or eating good food. It makes it more challenging. We could as easily subsidize, that is incentivize, that is help farmers to grow good food, eaters to eat good food, chefs and cooks to cook good food. So it's really a matter of will. What can we do, and how do we do it? I also want to say one thing, because I just want to make sure this gets said, is that part of what's so cool about what Alice has done is that she'll say this, I think, at the beginning, she was saying to farmers, here's the kind of food I'd like you to grow for us so that we could serve it to people who want it. And after a while, she recognized that the important thing was to say to the farmers, tell us what you're growing, and that's what we'll cook. And that's what's important, is knowing the land, treating it accordingly, growing what's good for it, rotating crops in a way that they should be, fertilizing with natural ingredients, and so on down the line, to produce food in a sustainable way that's actually good for people. That is a long way of describing what agroecology is. Agroecology is the combination of agriculture and ecology. And it's also a way of acknowledging that farming and food are at the basis of everything, not just land and not just nutrition, but health and justice and fairness.
Yeah. Alice, you talk in your book too about a kind of a value systems checklist. And I was going through the book, and you talk about things you don't like, convenience and packaging and, uniformity. But then there are things that you sort of talk up. In your book, you talk about biodiversity and beauty and stewardship. What is stewardship? Are you talking about in the kitchen, or are you talking about what Mark's talking about at the farm? I mean, you go out and visit farmers and talk to them. So I don't do that. So I kind of rely on you to tell me what I should be doing as a good practice.
Well, I think of stewardship in a very big way, that it's not just about taking care of the land. I'm thinking we can be really good stewards of each other. We can think of stewardship as a way to really promote biodiversity. We can think of it as the beauty of it, and we talk about this at the Edible Schoolyard, as beauty is a language of care. And stewardship is about caring. And it can apply to, I'm hoping I'm a good steward of the restaurant business, because I'm thinking about running that business differently, sort of regeneratively. I'd like to throw that word into the mix, because we're trying not to sustain what we have now, we're trying to regenerate it. So that's the step forward. So when I talk about organic, I use the word regenerative organic, because organic applies mostly to the labels from the government that are put on the foods that have a rather low idea, no herbicides, no pesticides. But I want to talk about the farmers that really are thinking of the soil as the nutrition of their crops, and are thinking about it in a very big way. It's not, and again, it's about not tilling, it's tractors and all these machines. And it's a whole lot more than no herbicides and pesticides. And so that's what we have to learn. And I think no better way, of course, than going to the farmer's market and meeting people.
Yeah.
Only way that I really understood real cost of food is that it tastes so good. And I'm sure you felt that way too, Mark.
No. I'm thinking about it because, my children are kind of in their mid to late 20s, and they are just beginning to live more independently and forming relationships. But they seem to, they've come out of COVID ordering takeout, and, they're in this kind of convenience world. And so my wife and I are saying, you'd save money if you cooked for yourself, you'd have better food, but it's hard to know how to get them to think about it as something fun and interesting. But farmer's market is a good idea. I took my son to the farmer's market the other day, and he said, can we go again? He had a great time. He, just touching the stuff when it's still, produce, and it's not yet served on a plate with a that somebody else has set up for you. So farmers markets are really good, but I was just sort of meditating, how do you get young people to care about food the way you two care about food?
Alice will answer that.
No, well, they have to,
I gave them Mark's cookbook, but it wasn't enough.
you have to cook together. And what I've done, and I did for my daughter when she was young, I said, I'll buy all the ingredients. Let's just do it together. Invite your friends over. And of course,
that's a great answer.
That they might like, but then, I gave them all jobs to do, and I disappeared at the end. But I've kept that up with my friends. We meet on Sunday night. I've gone to the market the day before. Sometimes they said, I'll bring this over or that over, and do it together. And we clean up the dishes together. So it's like a whole very important sort of hanging out and talking.
Yeah, I know that's a very good answer, because I was just reflecting, every time I've been with you in the last 2 or 3 times, you've brought a piece of fruit or a peach or a tangerine. And then I take that home and it's so much better tasting than the other stuff that I've got. You're like Johnny Appleseed. Here's physical evidence of my theory. Take it, eat it.
Eat it. It's true. And
See if it doesn't taste better.
but that,
I read something the other day about these people that are making vertical farms, and they're claiming that they can, algorithmically produce food that tastes better and strawberries and then it's like right to the restaurant, and
I
it's
don't.
technology. People think you can solve every problem with technology.
Well, that one you can't. Ripeness, you can't. And probably nutrition, you can't. This comes from nature. And it means
Yeah.
in order to solve all of our problems, we really have to fall in love with nature again. We've been
Yeah, I was wondering if you grow strawberries in a high rise, what's the terroir? I mean, it's an
Exactly.
iPhone app is the terroir, right?
There's no terroir.
Oh my goodness. Well, Beth, do we have questions ready to go?
We have dozens upon dozens of questions ready to go. I'm going to grab some that we seem to have several of the same question. One comes from Lynn, as well as some other people. I live in a rural environment where we only have about a 4-month growing season. What, Alice and Mark, would you suggest as a solution to access more produce during the colder months? Right now, we rely on frozen goods off season.
Go ahead, Mark.
I mean, I don't have a problem with frozen food. If you harvest things when they're at their peak and you freeze them, you can do just fine. But I'm not suggesting that a place with a 4-month growing season is going to supply enough good food for everyone to eat for the remaining 8 months. I think if we look at things as more regional and less local, if we look at transportation within a day's drive of farms, we can start to supply ourselves more locally and more regionally. It could be that, I don't know specifics of this particular instance, but it's got to be some combination of local food, frozen food, and obviously for the next X decades, we're going to be getting food from other parts of the country. But the question is, what kind of food is this? How is it grown, and what is it? Those are, to me, bigger questions than whether they come precisely from where you're from.
I'd love to answer that too, because I lived in New Jersey and my parents had a victory garden in the summer and we ate out of that garden. But pretty much for the rest of the year, we ate food that was canned, that they made applesauce, all of that from the garden. But I've looked up to Maine, and we have a friend who has a greenhouse up there, and he grows all winter long salads and carrots and things that he sells to the school system. Elliot Coleman is his name, and he closes during the summer months. That's his time off because there's lots of farmers markets and everything else in the summer. But people think there's nothing to eat in the winter. And that is not true. There is every kind of squash. There's every beautiful color of dried beans. There are nuts, there are dried fruits that we can have. Squashes, can you imagine all the squash dishes? We can make beautiful tomato sauce, confit tomatoes. We can have beautiful pastas. We have to look to people around the world that live in cold places that have done this since the beginning of civilization. You have to look there. It's a treasure trove. The Middle East is for me because the climate is very similar in the state of California. And I'm looking there to see what they ate that was affordable and delicious and nutritious. And that's how I'm thinking about school food. But I think we do need to have most everything come from within. She said, what did you say? A day's driving to where it's produced. But just think of all the grains that we've discovered in the last couple of years. Who knew about barley and farro, and all of these grains that are so nutritious, that all these breads we can make, and we haven't scratched the surface. So I'm, I always look forward to getting dates and oranges at Christmas time when I was a child. I didn't like either one, but my father did. I wanted candy. But, it is really possible. And again, eating seasonally has been the best thing ever for me, because instead of having mediocre this and that all year long, where your palate is dulled and your mind is, you get to wait until that moment comes for quiche mandarins. You eat them every day and then they're gone. And that's what's helped the restaurant stay alive for all these years, is that we're excited about the asparagus. But when it's gone, we're looking already to tomatoes. They haven't happened yet. So it's what keeps you, connected to that beautiful nature outside and what she can do. And we're learning every day. Every day, I learn something new.
That's now I'm excited about asparagus. That's lovely.
This is a question, hungry.
Mark. This is a question from Cynthia. What do you think about Epicurean no longer posting beef recipes?
I will plug my newsletter where we address this, Bittman Project, bittmanproject.com. I think it's a nice PR move, and I think it's honorable. I think the world probably has enough beef recipes. If someone can show me one that hasn't been done already, I'd be impressed. I don't think it's highly significant, but it's great that people are talking about it.
This is a question for both of you. Alice, we'll start with you. How has the pandemic affected your views regarding food, agriculture, packing plants, and restaurants? Do you think that this past year and a few months has showed us what isn't working?
Absolutely. I think that picture on the front page of the New York Times of all those animals being slaughtered, lying out on the ranch, and nobody being allowed to eat them, having them killed rather than dead, and was a real wake-up call for a lot of people. They didn't know about industrial farming, ranching. They didn't know. And to see those pictures was shocking. To see and to learn about the kids who weren't at the schools, who didn't have enough food. The food insecurity issue just came forth. And
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm so excited that I'm coughing, excuse me.
Look, he's gone. I think it showed that the industrial food system is vulnerable. It showed many people that we can rely on the strength of regional food systems if we support them and allow them to grow. Farmers markets have been packed for the past year. CSAs are all sold out. People have really come to rely on regional food. I think the pandemic, this is not exactly a food issue, although Alice touched on it. It is in that Food was being distributed to children and their parents for free in many, many schools for the whole year. There were all of these kind of de facto good moves that progressives have been pushing for years, and we were told were impossible. Buses were free in many cities. Meals again were free. All of these things were happening that couldn't have happened except in an emergency. But we are pretty much in a permanent state of emergency, and we need to respond as if that's the case. We have undernourished people in the United States, obviously. We have unemployed people. We have a climate crisis that is taking over the world. We have a public health crisis from the consumption of bad food all over the place. All of these things are important, and all of these things can be addressed by good policy, by organizing, by cooperation among people. And I think we saw a glimmer of that during the worst days of COVID.
Mark, your book touches on the idea of food sovereignty. Can you tell us about the work of iCollective, a group of indigenous chefs, artists, seed keepers, and activists?
Well, I would rather that we had them speak for themselves. But in general, increasing numbers of people are saying land has been distributed unfairly. It is not up to others to feed us. We want to be able to feed ourselves, to determine how we feed ourselves, what food we grow, and what food we eat. And that's important not only in the United States, but globally. You know, whenever you hear the phrase, how are we going to feed the 7 billion? Or how are we going to feed the 10 billion? What you're hearing is a marketing slogan for big ag.
Yes.
And in fact, what has to happen is that people have to have the right for self-determination, the right for food sovereignty, the right to own their own land, to control how food is grown in their neighborhoods, in their regions, in their countries. It is not up to American corporations to feed the rest of the world. That's not a road that's going to take us anywhere good.
And Mark, can I ask, why are we not thinking that the public school system could be that economic stimulus to address health, to address climate, to address the values we teach our children? I mean, it's right there in front of us. I mean, it's a universal, like eating, education is. And if you just decide to put the money in that place, it can be that supporter of local food. And I can bring back, you know, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. I mean, we need everything. I mean, to talk about simplicity in our lives again. What is important? Why do we buy a new dress every week? Oh, because it doesn't cost anything. We can just throw it out. It's like the idea of food being, if you don't like it, throw it out. There's always more where that came from. And it's that attitude that we have, that we fundamentally have to address. And what better place than in the public school system? We paid for that.
I mean, I'm with you. And when people ask what they can do, one of the things I always say is work on procurement in your public school system, because that's a starting place to get your schools to start feeding your children good food, and especially local food. That's a really key thing. And of course, food education, which is all important. We can't raise healthy adults until we teach children what real food is.
But we all need to run for superintendent of schools. That's where those decisions are made. I mean, I was lucky to do the edible schoolyard at Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School in Berkeley, because the principal was willing to take a risk. He said, go ahead, build a nonprofit on my campus, build a garden, hire teachers that don't have credentials, make it happen however you want. He said, but please don't talk about free school lunch yet. He said, I agree with you about organic free school lunch, but you're going to frighten people. That was 25 years ago. And then he let me know the other week, time to talk about it. But it's a place. I mean, it takes people who are going to take a risk. And that person, that was Principal Neil Smith, was willing to take a risk. And superintendents of schools, again, are in that place of compromise. They're trying to please everybody. But we need them to speak up for us and be willing to get the right person to procure the food, because the parents don't have very much power. They have to come together as a group.
I think that we have time for about 2 more questions. So I'm going to kind of lead into to kind of follow that on a bigger scale. Merle asks, what would it take for the FDA, indeed the federal government, to play a positive role in changing our relationship to food? Alice is pointing to Mark.
You know, it's so pathetic because we don't even have a commissioner of the FDA yet. So we were saying this, I mean, we've been saying this for 20 years, but we were saying this in the early days of the Obama administration. There are many things FDA and USDA and EPA could do to improve the food system, to help us build a better food system. The single simplest thing is to eliminate the routine use of antibiotics in the food supply, and FDA could make that happen in a week. And they could have made it happen in a week in 2009 also, but the Obama administration wasn't strong enough to do that. So this is really, I mean, this is a much, much bigger discussion, because you can sit around and fantasize about the things that government could be doing, but isn't. And Alice and I have had this conversation 10 times at least. But the question is, how do you get government to do the stuff that would be good for the food system and for social justice in general? And the answer to that is run it yourself. We have to be the people involved in government. We have to be the Congress people. We have to be the senators. We have to be the people who represent people who care about food. And so this sort of like granular way to think about that in a way is, before you ever vote for anybody, ask them what their position is on food policy. Ask them what they're going to do to make the food in your community or in your state or in your country better.
Alice?
I just want to add that making a model in a place that is very public of what could happen if you did this is, I think, more important than trying to make it happen all over at the same time. I mean, getting the federal government to really act. And so that's why it's so important for me to have the University of California take that and show us how we can do it. Show us. And we can all participate in that. But to have an institution that has that kind of research capability, the land, expertise, and brilliant is the way that we can show the federal government how we can take care of the land and the students, teach the values.
Great. Well, we have our action items. I love that. Last question, and I will ask this of all 3 of you. We'll go Alice, Mark, and Will. What's for dinner tonight?
Well, so glad you asked. I am happily going to pick up spit roasted chicken from Chez Denise, and they're giving it to me with a baguette and a big container of aioli. So I'm just going to make the salad that goes with it. And I have a good friend or two that are coming to dinner. That's it.
Mark.
Well, I'm not cooking because I'm on Zoom calls till 9. So you have to remember it's already 4:30 here. I will tell you what I made last night, which was a chickpea cauliflower curry with saffron rice, and that was good.
Wait, Will, what's for dinner?
Well, the better plan would be to have dinner with Alice, because it sounds like that's going to eat much better than I'm gonna. But I've been, we've been sort of fooling around with making pizzas at home, and I had a delicious pizza the other day at Green's that was an asparagus pizza, and I thought I'd try that.
Asparagus.
It'll probably be a disaster, but I find in cooking I have to screw it up a couple of times before it's, anything I'd show somebody else.
Now, let me just tell you one thing on your pizza when you make it. I just had one from Chez Denise today, and it had some broccoli on it and hot pepper. And I just said, there's something a little missing. And then I said, oh my God, and I zested some lemon rind on top. And it made it just
Okay, all right.
like that. And I immediately called the restaurant and said, great lemon.
Stop the ovens, hold page 1.
The food equivalent of stop the presses. I love it. Well, with that, we have gone well over time and worthily so. Thank you all for tuning in. If you were late to this event, don't worry. This entire conversation has been recorded and it will be up on altaonline.com later today. I'm also going to email all of you a link to it. Next week, author and Alta contributor Joy Lansendorfer will join Alta's managing editor Blaise Zariga for a discussion on her new book. And food friends, on Wednesday, May 26th, Alta is hosting a rollicking 5 p.m. happy hour conversation on the world of California-based distilleries and locally sourced cocktails. Joining us will be Alta writers Michael Bauer and Nicholas Mancall-Battelle, complete with Rye on the Road custom cocktail kit you can order online. I'd like to thank Mark and Alice for joining us today and congratulate them on their very exciting new books. And of course, my wonderful boss, Will Hearst. And all of you for participating in today's discussion and taking the time. Thank you all so, so very much. Stay safe and eat well.
Thank you both. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.